This is it. My biggest Breath of the Wild 2 video yet, and probably the longest one I'll make until the game comes out. I've had over 2 years to think about the game by now, but I've never done any sort of comprehensive prediction or wishlist video. Now that I've had a good long while to consider everything about the game, I think it's time to begin my predictions, starting with my favorite element of most Zelda games, the story. As you may know, I'm a little bit invested in The Legend of Zelda's lore. The story is probably the thing I've thought about most, so it'll take up the majority of this prediction video. Linking directly to the ending of the last game, here's my rough prediction of the entire game's plot, beginning with, of course, the first game's end. As a quick refresher, we'll review the ending of Breath of the Wild. With every ending unlocked, we learn a few things. First, we know that the champion's spirits have poofed away. Second, we know that Vah Ruta has reportedly stopped working. And third, we know that Zelda no longer hears the voice within the Master Sword. She states that this may mean her powers have dwindled over time, and while that's certainly possible, it could simply be that Fi has stopped talking now that Ganon is sealed up once again. As for Vah Ruta stopping working, I suspect that's because, like the other divine beasts, its champion no longer exists in Hyrule. The champions were bound to their divine beasts on a deep level, so while they lingered on as spirits, they maintained their bonds to their machines. Now that they all seem to have passed on more permanently though, nobody is controlling the divine beasts anymore. As a result, it seems like the beasts have gone dormant once again like they were before they were initially activated. This leaves the first big question about how the protagonists will proceed. What should be done with all the Sheikah technology that's left lying around? Well, they could attempt to bury all of the Sheikah technology like what happened 10,000 years prior. However, this, as we've seen, would only postpone the issue to a distant generation when Calamity Ganon broke free from his seal. The Hyruleans won't want that to happen naturally, but there's no clear way to totally destroy all of the Sheikah tech either. Even if that were possible, Zelda probably wouldn't want to take that route with her love of the technology. So I believe there's one probable path the protagonists will take. Replace the champions and seek out a way to prevent malice corruption. It seems clear to me that Sidon, Yunobo, Riju, and Teba would be the new champions. Having taken on many of the responsibilities the champions themselves had, and by allying themselves with Link, they have easily proven their willingness to protect Hyrule just like the champions. If the development team chooses to use Age of Calamity as canon, then they may already be suitable pilots for the beasts. If not, training them for some basic functions shouldn't take too long, since the protagonists have already gone through champion training once before. However, solving the malice issue will be a daunting task. In order to learn more about malice corruption, the Sheikah scientists will need more malice to study. But Link and Zelda got rid of all of it, right? Well, almost all of it. You see, modern Hyrule hasn't completely forgotten about Ganondorf. King Rome and the champion Urbosa both mention a man who became Calamity Ganon, who seems for all intents and purposes to be Ganondorf. While Calamity Ganon seems to be a somewhat different form than Ganon in previous games, there's clearly a connection, both in name and in behavior. With some research in Hyrule Castle's library, Link and Zelda might find that the kingdom's age-old nemesis was buried far deeper than the technology he corrupted. Upon this discovery, they'll set out for a long expedition, seeking to retrieve a sample of Ganondorf or his malice, whichever they find first. In the meantime, the champions in training will continue bonding with their divine beasts in their respective regions. In order to reach Ganondorf, Link and Zelda will need to find whatever path leads down to his resting, or restless, place. As many people have suggested, the temple cave entrance thing we saw in the first original trailer seems to be the most likely candidate. I suspect it was buried ages ago, similar to the Sheikah technology, and there will be some excavation done to find the entrance. Regardless of where the entrance is found, it won't be long before Link and Zelda venture into the deep, dark tunnels underground to find the King of Evil. So far, I think this explanation fits nice enough with what we know. It would help explain why Link and Zelda ever approached Ganondorf in the cave, since they need a sample from him to make the Malice antivirus. While the exact method by which they learn Ganondorf's location is unclear from the trailers, they definitely knew what they were getting into, as they were prepared for a significant journey with their pack animal covered in stuff and their adventuring gear equipped. Things only get more speculative from here though, so hang on to your pointy green hats. Now we reach the big scene where everything goes wrong for our heroes. I suspect that Link and Zelda will enter Ganondorf's tomb room, gradually approach him, and then the violent quaking will begin. Zelda will drop down to where Ganondorf is, Link will try to help Zelda back up, the green hand will latch onto Link, Ganondorf will be set free, Malice will lash out at Link, and he'll attack Link or something, leeching off some of his power which he built up over Breath of the Wild. This will reset Link's health to the 3-heart standard, Link will drop the Master Sword, and the attack will render Link unconscious. Ganondorf will use his newly leeched strength to push up the cavern roof, lifting up Hyrule Castle on a huge spire of stone and malice. By doing so, Ganondorf will flee the scene, causing the cavern to crumble apart even more. As the floor falls away, Zelda will drop into the caverns below, and since Link dropped the Master Sword, it will fall down as well, leaving Link unconscious and alone in the cavern. Now, I realize I just dropped a lot of information here. The big thing I'm getting at is that all 3 main characters will be split up by the end of this scene. Due to this, we'll split the rest of the story predictions into 3 main parts: Link's story, Zelda's story, and Ganondorf's story. I'll go over the story from each character's perspective, explaining the aftermath of this scene and how things all tie together by the end. First, we'll start with Link. The events of the first trailer leave Link with a green hand, 3 hearts, and a lost Zelda and Master Sword. So, here's something I've got to mention now. I'm not personally settled on what or who I think the green hand is. I don't think we really have enough evidence to make a solid theory or even much of a hypothesis. But of the characters we do know of, the ancient hero from 10,000 years ago seems like a viable candidate to me. So for this video, we'll run with that. When Link wakes back up, he'll naturally be concerned about where Zelda has gone. After all, the last time he saw her, she was falling into the deeper caverns. However, the green hand, whether it talks or just does sign language, will convince him that the spirit within the Master Sword will take care of her, and that there is something else that Link must do right away. At this point, the hand will give Link some extra backstory on the ancient Calamity. First, he'll tell Link that 10,000 years ago, when Calamity Ganon first encountered the Sheikah Guardians, he discovered how to corrupt them with his malice. Though he didn't have time to corrupt as much as he did in Breath of the Wild, it was a clear sign that should Calamity Ganon ever return, he could easily turn their greatest defense against them. For this reason, the Hylians banished the technology 10,000 years ago. The hero and the princess began searching for a way to prevent the malice corruption, but they never completed their research. They did, however, learn of one thing that might combat malice corruption better than anything else: spirit energy. In an effort to prevent Calamity Ganon from ever returning, they hunted down its source, the body of Ganondorf, and stowed it away in a cavern filled with luminous stones containing spirit energy. As an extra measure, the hero himself resolved to guard Ganondorf long after his death in the form of a spirit, pinning down the King of Evil deep underground. This partial seal kept most of the malice at bay, but over time it built up, and by the time of Breath of the Wild, it was enough to corrupt all the Sheikah technology in Hyrule. This, of course, was the calamity that eventually was repelled by Link and Zelda. So this leads us back to the present. There was still enough malice to keep Ganondorf hanging on by a thread, and now if he isn't stopped, Hyrule may be placed under his rule once again. In order to ensure that Hyrule will always have a safe defense against evil, the Sheikah technology needs to be malice-proofed, and the answer is what the ancient hero has in his hand, the green spirit energy. Link must immediately begin his journey to the Sky World we see in the second trailer, where more of his questions about spirits and spirit energy will be answered. The Spirit Realm Sky World place will be where several of the game's dungeons are held. The massive stone structures we see will be temples Link must enter, and they will hold trials that he must pass in order to gain new abilities. These abilities will help him progress through more temples, like items in other games. The overall point of these dungeons will be similar to the Silent Realms in Skyward Sword, but instead of strengthening his own spirit, Link will be strengthening the spirit that travels with him so that their combined power grows. Once their strength is sufficient, they'll go to face Ganondorf, but not before another important event takes place. To explain that though, we'll need to look at the other stories in this plot. Let's switch over to Zelda, picking up from where she and Link got split up. She seems to have fallen into a deep part of Hyrule, even deeper than whatever cavern Ganondorf was in. I think this would be a good time for Zelda to be playable. At some point during Link's story, perhaps after beating the first dungeon or 3, we switch over to Zelda's perspective, waking up in the darkest depths of Hyrule. With Ganondorf newly awakened, Zelda's primary objective is to return to the surface and drive him off, as Link cannot stop Ganondorf alone. After all, Zelda's power is essential to defeating Ganondorf, at least in all the other battles he appears in, and I imagine that remains the case in this game. However, these caverns are incredibly dark, deep, and dangerous, and as we all know well, it's dangerous to go alone. Thankfully, Zelda isn't alone. She'll be stuck with the Master Sword, another essential weapon against Ganondorf, which just so happens to contain the helpful guide Fi. Fi is probably the most knowledgeable being in all of Hyrule at this point, and if anyone knows how to get out, it's probably her. Since she proved in Breath of the Wild that she can speak to Zelda, I imagine the return of Ganondorf will prompt her to help out once again. She'll provide guidance to Zelda as they progress, and she can tell Zelda all sorts of things that have been lost to time. Zelda and Fi will begin just by escaping the caverns underneath Hyrule, but as time progresses, they'll begin to discuss the origins of Zelda's powers. Along the way, the Triforce will eventually get brought up, and since Fi has been in the Master Sword all along, she'll know what happened to it. She'll tell Zelda that the Triforce was stashed away long, long ago, even before the first calamity. It was done to prevent humans from acquiring it, since it seems like war breaks out whenever humans know where it is. Fi will explain that Zelda's powers are the key to finding the ancient relic should they ever need it. With Hyrule faced by an evil surpassing even Calamity Ganon, Zelda will begin her search for the Triforce, and eventually will reach the sacred relic. With the whole Triforce before her, victory won't seem too far off. Of course, there's no way it'll be that easy, right? After all, we still have to talk about how Ganondorf ties into all of this. Like we did with the others, let's pick up from the scene shown in the first trailer. Now, Ganondorf won't begin the game with his usual cunning intellect. Rather, he'll be driven by pure malice, lashing out at Link and Zelda upon seeing them. As I mentioned earlier, I think he'll drain some of Link's health when they meet, but while Link will be left weaker than before, this will be the first big step towards Ganondorf's recovery. With this regained strength, he'll pull the move where he lifts Hyrule Castle into the air. Over the next portion of the game, Ganondorf will slowly recover his memories, personality, and intellect from within Hyrule Castle. Once he recovers sufficiently, his first goal will be to regain his trident, a powerful relic that may indeed be the same Trident of Darkness that's been seen before. And for fun, I'll add another level to this prediction. This game will in fact confirm that Girahim is within the trident. This isn't a theory I came up with myself, rather seeing it passed around from other theorists, but I do quite enjoy it and I think it fits perfectly for this game's purposes. This scheme will take up the first portion of the game, where Ganondorf's forces are scouring both the land and the sky for his powerful weapon. When Ganondorf has the trident, and consequently Girahim back at his side, he'll catch on to Zelda's quest. He'll make haste to track her down, and harkening back to his Ocarina of Time days, he'll swoop in to snatch the Triforce right at the last second. The Triforce will do its thing where it splits, but Ganondorf will be prepared this time around, immediately taking Zelda prisoner and preparing for Link to arrive. Since evil cannot hold the Master Sword, Ganondorf will have to leave it, causing Link to retrieve it not terribly long after. This will help Link in his preparations to take on Ganondorf, but before he can directly face him, Link must regain more strength and then find a way to dispel the malice surrounding Hyrule Castle. In the meantime, Ganondorf will make sure not to repeat his mistake in Ocarina of Time, and instead of underestimating Link's power, he'll go all in on his commandeered castle's defenses. Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf are great and all, but there's another force at play who we have yet to talk about: the Divine Beasts and the new champions. As mentioned earlier, they'll try to bond with their Divine Beasts in a similar manner to the previous champions while Link and Zelda are finding Ganondorf. However, their plans will change when the castle suddenly shoots up with a bunch of malice. Preparing for the worst, each new champion will take their Divine Beast to somewhere in Hyrule that'll be hard to reach. Valruta will go deep into the waters off of Hyrule's coast, Valrudania into the heart of Death Mountain, Valneboris into the frigid Gerudo Highlands, and Valmeadow into the Great Ravine bordering Hyrule on the north side. Each beast would find some place that's difficult to reach, simply hoping that Ganon's malice cannot reach them from there. As Link progresses through the Sky Islands and overcomes difficult challenges, he will gain enough spirit energy to protect each Divine Beast one by one. Each time a beast is powered up with spirit energy, it will return to protect its home region, driving away the monsters that Ganondorf sends to assault each area. The beasts won't be as pivotal to the plot as they were in Breath of the Wild, but they'll still keep a fairly significant role in the story. So that about sums up my expectations for the game's story. Obviously I didn't go over every single detail, as that would take super duper long. This was easily the longest part of the prediction video, mostly because I've been mulling it over for, well, 2 years I guess. If you've ever talked to me about this stuff, you might recognize some ideas I've brought up before, but hopefully most of this stuff is new to you. I realize that the chances of any or all of this being correct are rather slim, but I know there's a lot of other people who enjoy prediction videos, so I didn't want to go halfway on the story portion. That said, let's take a look at some other aspects of the game that we have yet to talk about. Breath of the Wild has a pretty unusual combat system for a Zelda game, but in combination with the wild physics engine, it can get breathtaking pretty quickly. One thing I do miss though is some more elaborate swordplay. No more can we perform jabs, special sword skills, or anything too fancy without a lot of glitches. We already know we'll get some new weapons to use, but adding more ways to use those weapons exponentially increases the options we have as players. So, since we're already going with the ancient hero identity for the green hand, why not take advantage of that? In a very Twilight Princess-esque situation, the spirit of the ancient hero could teach Link sword skills that have faded into legend, further improving his combat capabilities. If any older sword skills get included, I'm guessing the ending blow will come back, since that's kind of been established as the best way to defeat tough enemies in Zelda games. Another skill I'd expect to see return is an enhanced spin attack, either like the Great Spin or like the Hurricane Spin. Those are always very nice to have to deal with large groups of enemies. Other skills like the Helm Splitter and Backslice would be neat to see back in a Zelda game, but in the end what I'm saying is that the green hand might enhance Link's swordplay. The world of the sequel has a lot of opportunities to improve. As you can tell, Breath of the Wild has the biggest map of any Zelda game to date, divided up to 15 sections. From the snowy peaks of Hebra to the vast Gerudo Desert, every area has a distinct theme, except for the Gerudo Highlands, which are just a discount Hebra region. Of course, with all this space just waiting to be used, the question remains, what will they change? We already know that the world itself is being stretched upwards, with the Sky Islands added onto the map, but regular old Hyrule needs some love too. So let's take a look at what changes may come to the massive kingdom. First off, let's take a look at something that may change as a result of the story. The 5 primary settlements found across Hyrule, being Kakariko Village, Zora's Domain, Goron City, Gerudo Town, and Rito Village, were fairly stable throughout Breath of the Wild, provided Link didn't bring any guardians into town. I think the sequel may shake this up, bringing some monsters into settlements as part of Ganondorf's effort to regain control of Hyrule. This will occur as long as the divine beasts remain in hiding, but after Link malice-proofs them, then they'll come out and scare away any future monster invasions. In the meantime though, most villagers will remain in the confines of their homes, with the soldiers and guards of each town trying to stave off the intruders. Upon stopping the invasions, more side quests and shops will open up, giving Link an incentive to actually complete the Divine Beast quests besides beating the game. On the topic of towns, I also think we'll see some reconstruction in the new game. I highly doubt there will be a lot done when we start the game, since it may pick up only days after the first one, but there's nothing stopping us from doing some reconstruction as we play. I think we could see this process contained in several small side quests, each featuring a different set of ruins. As you travel around the overworld, you'll run into familiar ruins from the first game. The Outpost ruins, the Gopanga village ruins, and other notable ruined settlements. At such places, you'll find a member of the Bolson Construction Company, and by doing some tasks for them, collecting wood, gemstones, etc., they'll rebuild part of that settlement. Like with Terrytown, people will move into the remade homes, but in this game the new structures will match the style of the old ruins. Different style buildings will require different materials to rebuild, so you'll have to collect stuff as you adventure if you want to rebuild all of Hyrule. Another thing I expect we'll see in the sequel is new special monster camps. Contrary to the common camps that surround large trees, there are several unique monster camps in Breath of the Wild that use the terrain to their advantage. It looks like 1 or 2 such camps may have already been shown in the sequel, such as the one occupied by moblins in the Elden region, but I suspect we'll see even more than that. I could see them adding a camp or 2 around the Thundra Plateau area, since we put an end to the constant storming in the first game. As an homage to Ganon's typical evil lair, I think they'll stick at least a couple monsters near Spectacle Rock, especially since Vane Boris won't be right there anymore. Exact details on such monster camps would be pretty tedious to explain, but I think you get the idea. And finally, this might not be so much a change to the world as it is a gameplay feature, but I'll put it here anyway. If you saw the first theory video I put out after the second trailer released, you know I have a strong feeling that dragons will be relevant to the spirity realm in the sky. An idea that came up not long after was that the dragons of Hyrule would be how Link gets to the sky. And I think that's not only a great idea, but seems completely reasonable as a method of travel between these two realms. If the dragons are still around in Hyrule, Link might be able to ride them up into the sky, perhaps with the help of the Spirit Hand. If you want to know a little more about the potential involvement of dragons in the sequel, I'll link that video right now. And a lot of interesting ideas were presented in the comments too, so you can certainly check them out when you have the time. Now, there's a couple other topics that I could go on for a while about that I'd like to briefly touch on here. I've talked in the past about ideas for items, dungeons, and monsters that could show up in the sequel. If I were to discuss them as long as I wanted right now, this video would be around an hour and a half long, so I'll just dedicate one paragraph each to these topics, starting with items. If the sequel brings back any items from previous Zelda games, I think the most likely is going to be bombs. Since it doesn't seem like Link has the Sheikah Slate anymore, he can't produce remote bombs, and unless the Green Hand can do something pretty similar, then it looks like we'll be going back to the old kind of bombs. Not that I'm complaining. In fact, I quite miss having items that aren't virtually infinite. Assuming that fast travel is more limited as well, the sequel will force you to be a little more careful with managing your bombs, else you'll need to keep going back to Eldin to restock on bomb flowers. I know bombs aren't exactly the most groundbreaking item. Well, actually they kind of are, but I think if we see any item come back, it'll be them. Dungeons in the sequel is a very complex topic. Many Zelda games have very similar dungeon themes, with your forest dungeons, fire dungeons, water dungeons, and more. Almost every game has a few standout dungeons too, or in the case of games like Link's Awakening, Oracle of Seasons, and Oracle of Ages, each dungeon has a totally unique basis. I get the feeling that Breath of the Wild will follow this latter pattern, with weird spirit-themed dungeons, dungeons that take place in decrepit ancient ruins, and more such locations. While we're on the subject of dungeons, let's talk about mini-dungeons for a bit. Breath of the Wild had an abundance of shrines that Link could test himself at, earning spirit orbs that would enhance his health or stamina. I think this concept will be brought over to the sequel, but in a new form. My running idea is that there will be locations all over the surface and the Sky Islands that will function like shrines. Let's say that they'll look like the little stone buildings up in the sky. When Link stops at one, he'll go from the Light World to the Spirit Realm. In a similar fashion to the Silent Realms in Skyward Sword, he'll travel the area surrounding the shrine, collecting spirit fragments or something of that nature that will strengthen Link and the Spirit Hand. These will effectively replace the shrines from the first game, while also letting us see a different side of Hyrule and the Sky Realm. And of course, one of my favorite topics, Zelda monsters. We got to see a weird snaky wormy plant thing get torched in the last trailer, and that alone has me giddy to see more unfamiliar enemies in the game. I have no doubt there will be more of them, but which ones will we see? Well, I expect that a couple of the creepier enemies will come back. After all, Ganondorf is basically a re-dead so far, and some more enemies like Stalfos and Pose wouldn't be very out of place in a similar setting. Spooky enemies would be pretty cool, but I'm also hoping for a few of the series' classic foes to return, such as Ropes, Gorayas, Darknuts, and pretty much every enemy that exists, really. That said, I expect the first ones on the priority list will be either the ghosty and spirity enemies, or simply remixed versions of Breath of the Wild's current enemies. And because I don't know any better, I saved the most controversial part for last. Giving a title idea is always kind of difficult for a couple reasons, but mainly because I don't have an epic, all-new trailer to show you that gets you in the mindset to appreciate the title. For instance, the game's title could be The Legend of Zelda Lost Kingdom, but that wouldn't make any sense if I didn't first show you a trailer where Link runs into a mysterious new civilization. So, try to imagine an epic, intense trailer where tidbits of the story outline I mentioned earlier come into play, where the title of the game is... drumroll please... The Legend of Zelda Kindred Spirits. Now, allow me to explain. The story basis involves Link with his green spirit hand, Zelda with the blue spirit sword, and Ganondorf with, well, a potentially Girahim holding trident. Each of these spirits bears strong ties to their companion. Link would be exploring with a distant ancestor, one who had faced the very same evil Link had. Zelda would be traveling with Fi, who she not only has spoken to before, but was created long ago to help her ancestors. And while Girahim doesn't have any direct ties to Ganondorf, his position as the right hand of the Demon King demise would surely sway him to serve the new Demon King. So, in a sense, all of them are related, hence the idea kindred spirits. Naturally, a great many other names would work too, and I'm not sure this is even the best name for this idea. However, I'm too tired and lazy at this point to think of a better one, so if you can think of one, be sure to let me know with a comment. And that's it! That's pretty much everything I can think of when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2, at least that I want to make a video out of. I hope there was something here you hadn't heard before, especially since this video idea has been kind of exhausted by now. My goal was to be pretty much as thorough as possible, but if I did miss something, or if you have ideas to add on to all of this, the comment section awaits. And with all of that said, I think I'll go sit down for a while before I begin to edit this all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time you're in the Legend Zone.